saw trying to tie those suckers up. It's just... We can find other ways for enjoyment and to show pleasure, I'm sure.
All right. So it's a big no to balloons on this Wednesday's panel. Your thoughts, text us 2101. Are you along with banning the balloon as well? So obviously, and Bunnings, very interesting, said this was in response to customer feedback. So it was the customers who... who came to the party here.
Good on them.
This is an interesting tale from the Deep South. The man who runs the council-owned Gore Motor Camp has been accused of being racist, drunk and argumentative by several posts on TripAdvisor. One reviewer left the campground in May of this year. They say after being met by a man who, quoting, seemed determined to get into an argument and spoke about his family and financial problems. When they asked for the key for the cabin, they were told to get the F out, I'm not renting you a cabin. So an intriguing tale from the Gore Motor Camp, council-owned. Morgan, have you been there?
Thankfully not. If I had have seen, those TripAdvisor comments online, I would have thought, oh yeah, okay, maybe they're exaggerated, maybe it did happen. But then when the media got a hold of this guy and he, went on the record with them, he suddenly confirmed all of those TripAdvisor comments. I'll never be going to the Gore campsite. I'll probably never be going to Gore now.
Oh, poor Gore.
That's right. I actually felt quite sorry for Gore because, look, I haven't been there for many years, but, apparently they've got wide streets, all good. He does sound like Gore's very own Basil Fawlty, though, doesn't he, Victoria?
Look, he does, and he seems very entertaining to read about, but it's not very good for Gore's tourism.
Basil says TripAdvisor is run by the mafia. What's been to the both of you? What's been your experience at TripAdvisor? Do you go there looking for advice, or?
I do, but it's a mixed bag. I find anywhere that's good will have some negative reviews and vice versa. I'll go for general guidance, but I definitely don't rely absolutely on what people on TripAdvisor say.
Finally, we're going to squeeze in this one because this is quite interesting, isn't it? A British study has found that women think that catcalling is more acceptable than men. This from the National Centre for Social Research. It looks at British social attitudes. 61% of men think it's always or usually wrong for a man to comment on a woman's appearance on the street, but 52% of women said it is wrong. Does this happen in New Zealand, catcalling? Victoria, your thoughts on this?
Well, as an attractive woman, obviously it happens all the time to me. No, look, when I was younger, I used to get catcalled, but I haven't been catcalled, and I haven't heard of other women being catcalled for years and years, to be honest. That's true, and I'm not a woman, Morgan, but we have an enormous amount of buildings. We have a lot of building sites in Auckland, and I'm past them every day. It just seems to be the workers these days are head down, they're busy. There's not a lot of sort of looking out into the street. Are they not commenting on your long legs?
On my tweed jacket or anything, Morgan?
Yeah, I don't know about that study. I wonder, did a man conduct that study? Because the results surprised me.
Absolutely. It is great having... Oh, here we go. So what's next? Balloons? What about condoms? Do we ban them next? That's a whole other issue there.
Right. For tomorrow.
Maybe. It's been a pleasure having you both on. Victoria Stewart and Morgan Godfrey, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wallace.
Thanks,
great
Wallace.
to be here.
And I'm back tomorrow, filling in for Jim Mora.
Tō mara e hoa mai hei kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight on the program, the nurses' strike will go ahead. We have the latest media conference on as we speak. The 12 Thai schoolboys are out of the flooded caves and recovering really well in hospital. A reward is offered for information about the Awanuiarangi Black following his widow's Facebook statement that he was a pedophile. President Trump says the UK is in turmoil, Europe is stinting and unfair, and Vladimir Putin is easy. More on the Auckland property developer whose contempt for the RMA saw him end up in jail. France beat Belgium, so who will they play? And Cody Dieback, is enough being done to arrest it? Plus Joseph Parker joins us. All of that and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Nurses have confirmed they'll go on ahead with their strike tomorrow. Last-ditch talks between nurses and District Health Board negotiators ended mid-morning. The nurses' organisation says negotiations with the DHBs will continue, but members will walk off the job for 24 hours from 7 o'clock tomorrow morning regardless. The DHBs are holding a news conference about the strike now and say they're very disappointed the industrial action has not been called off. There'll be more on this story in Checkpoint. A government report has detailed verbal and physical abuse that children have suffered at early childhood education centres. The Ministry of Education received nearly 340 complaints against individual services across the country last year, and nearly half were upheld. Complaints included isolating and physically harming children, problems with health and safety policies and poor hygiene levels. In one case, a child was left with a dislocated shoulder after being roughly handled by a teacher. The teacher was later dismissed and charged with assault. The police say they've been left gobsmacked by the behaviour of 3 teenagers who stole a car and drove it at high speed the wrong way down Auckland's southern motorway. 2 females aged 18 and 12 and a 15-year-old boy are in police custody after the frightening drive in which the car also crashed into a police car and a truck. The police area commander, Inspector Dave Glossop, says it's lucky no one was injured.
Vehicles are travelling down the motorway at 100 kilometres an hour, and when you've got a car in the fast lane going the wrong way heading towards those vehicles at 100 kilometres an hour, impact would be fatal. No doubt about that. Police who are involved in pursuits, the staff from the Eagle helicopter, everybody just gobsmacked that people would be just so stupid.
Inspector Dave Glossop. Tauranga's Deputy Mayor says allegations that a local leader was a pedophile have shocked the community, but the council hasn't officially discussed it. The claims against Te Awanui-a-Rangi Black were made by his widow, Anahira Black, at the weekend. She also said there was a child sex ring in Tauranga. Deputy Mayor Kelvin Clout says they are alarming allegations.
Obviously the community needs to be concerned, and I'm sure this is not a Tauranga only or Bay of Plenty only issue. The issue of sexual abuse and people sort of being undercover and going underground is obviously a nationwide issue.
Tauranga Deputy Mayor Kelvin Clout. An Auckland woman says she alerted the council to problems with a property developer 17 years before he was finally sentenced to 2 years in prison for polluting the environment. E Kuo Lau, also known as Augustine Lau, was yesterday jailed for 2 years for breaching the Resource Management Act and the Building Act multiple times. Edward Gay reports.
Lau's sentence is the longest ever handed down by a court for Resource Management Act offending. Louise Richardson says she lived next door to a Mount Eden property Lau was managing in 2001. She says 12 people were living in the 2-bedroom home and there was rotting rubbish left in the driveway and building going on day and night. She says she frequently called council in tears. Auckland Council's Regulatory Compliance Manager, Steve Pearce, says Miss Richardson's complaints predate his time at the council, but much has changed since. He says the council's better resourced and skilled to deal with complex investigations. I Tāmaki Makoto, ko Edward Gay aho.
The Chief Executive of RNZ says the new funding announced today will be like a dose of steroids for the public broadcaster. Out of the $15 million allocated in the May budget, RNZ will get $4.5 million this financial year. The rest will go into a new innovation fund and to New Zealand On Air. The Minister Claire Curran says this is just the first step for RNZ and she'll be seeking more money in next year's budget. The funding allocations are based on recommendations from a ministerial advisory group. Airways New Zealand is trialling new drone detection systems as air traffic controllers report more drones near airports. A survey shows there are now about 280,000 people in New Zealand who own or operate a drone, and an increase has been noticeable around Auckland in particular. Jeremy Sharp says Airways, the air navigation service provider, is investing in the new drone detection system, which has the support of the Civil Aviation Authority.
Somebody needs to take the lead on it, so our CEO is very keen on trialling this technology, and what it is a very accurate holographic radar system that can apparently tell the difference between a drone and a sparrow about 8 miles away.
Jeremy Sharp, who's among aviation industry specialists and commercial drone operators, at a 3-day seminar in Nelson. The CAA says operators of drones for recreational use can expect to see tougher rules in future. It's 5:05. Sport. The Chiefs will be without All Blacks duo Sam Cane and Damien McKenzie for their clash with the Hurricanes in the final round of Super Rugby. Cane will not be risked in Friday night's match in Hamilton after suffering a head knock at last weekend's match. McKenzie is serving the second of his stand-down games for the All Blacks. The Hurricanes have made just 3 changes to their 23, with competition leading try scorer Ben Lamb back on the right wing. The two teams are set to meet again in next weekend's quarterfinals, and the Chiefs need a big bonus point win on Friday to claim hosting rights from the Hurricanes. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed the Black Ferns will go on a 2-test tour of France at the end of the year, bringing their 2018 schedule to 5 matches. The world champion side will also warm up for their international season with a game of 3 halves in Tauranga next month. Queensland fullback Billy Slater will bring an end to his Maroons career in tonight's 3rd State of Origin match in Brisbane. New South Wales have the series wrapped up, but stand-in Queensland skipper Slater is determined to end a 31-game Origin career on a high. He says playing his last game at Queensland's spiritual home of Suncorp Stadium makes it a particularly special.
To have my final game at Suncorp, it's going to be really special. Yeah, I don't know, the cards have fell my way there, and yeah, I'm looking forward to running out and leading the boys out onto Suncorp Stadium.
Billy Slater. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Melody Thomas is being sex positive on Bang. We have a window on the world of one-child families, and Nick Holm back from a humour conference in Estonia. You don't think they're taking it a little bit too seriously, do you?
And for an eclectic mix of music, news, interviews and anything else we can squeeze into the hour, join me for Lately. After the extended news bulletin at 10, I'll be talking current affairs, foreign affairs, politics, music and the arts. For an eye on the world, Lately with Karen Hay, 10 to 11, weeknights on RNZ National.
Net service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine spells, scattered showers clearing in the west tomorrow from Waitomo northwards. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, however brief showers spreading north tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Mainly fine, a few showers about the ranges and Tararua district spreading everywhere for a time tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, fine apart from showers this evening and overnight with snow to 300 metres in Otago and 600 metres in Canterbury. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, outbreaks of rain with some heavy falls, hail and possible thunderstorms, clearing tomorrow apart from a few showers in Bulla. For Southland, a period of rain later today with squally thunderstorms and snow lowering to 300 metres, a few morning showers then becoming fine, and for the Chatham Islands a few showers. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina, and thank you everyone for being with us. First up tonight, the nurses' strike tomorrow is going ahead. Thousands of nurses are scheduled to walk off the job at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning for a 24-hour strike. There have been last-ditch talks today between nurses and District Health Board negotiators. They ended mid-morning. The parties went into talks yesterday afternoon at the direction of the Employment Relations Authority. A few minutes ago, Helen Mason, who's a spokesperson for the DHBs, began a media conference. It's still running. Our reporter Karen Brown is there. She'll join us live shortly. But this is some of what Helen Mason has had to say.
We're very disappointed to be advised that NZNO is going ahead with a strike. We are awaiting the final recommendations from the ERA facilitator, and we're very disappointed that strike action is going ahead, given that we have yet to receive those final recommendations and neither parties had an opportunity to review the recommendations. DHBs look forward to receiving the final recommendations from the facilitator, and we will be taking those recommendations very seriously and considering them very seriously. And we'll be taking our time over that, but we're pleased that we've had the opportunity to work with the facilitator. The facilitator has considered the matters from both parties' perspectives, is very, very well versed in the issues, has absolutely heard nurses' concerns, as have DHBs.
Helen Mason speaking a short time ago. That media conference has now ended. Our health correspondent Karen Brown was there. She's ducked outside to talk to us. Karen, what else did Helen Mason have to say?
Well, Helen Mason, we were asking her, when will you get the final recommendations from the Employment Relations Authority? She said that the facilitator, the ERA, has considered both sides very carefully, that they don't have those final recommendations yet, and they don't know when the ERA will release those. In the meantime, Helen Mason, the DHB spokeswoman, said that the DHBs will be taking those recommendations seriously and considering them seriously. But, of course, they're not binding, John, those recommendations. No. But the DHBs are sounding annoyed this evening at the nurses having announced in the last half an hour, I understand, that they are going ahead with a strike. Helen Mason said the district health boards are disappointed that nurses intend to continue the strike. And she said DHBs want to avoid this unprecedented strike action. And she said that when the DHBs receive the DHBs regard themselves as still in facilitation with the nurses, and she said when the DHBs receive the recommendations from the facilitator, the EPA, they will consider them immediately. Of course, by then the strike may already be underway. And she was asked, well, what happens in that case? And she said, well, we'll consider them, immediately. But she also was at pains to point out that district health boards are well prepared. She said, we've been preparing for 3 months for this. Nurses, of course, as you've reported, are 70% of the district health boards, the hospital's workforce. But she said they're well prepared. They will have nurses on and other medical professionals tomorrow. And she thanks all those who will be working tomorrow, including obviously some members of the nurses' union who are delivering life-preserving services.
Karen Brown, who was at that media conference from the DHB spokesperson, Helen Mason. Really interesting. We're going to try and find out what was being discussed in those talks this morning, because the amount of money available in the offer was not going to increase. So we're going to try and hear from the Nurses Union. What was it that they were seeking to resolve as these last-minute talks were going on? Karen was talking about people getting ready for tomorrow. Yes, GPs and doctors' clinics are gearing up for thousands of nurses to walk off the wards tomorrow. Elective surgeries have, of course, been postponed. Hospitals winding down in preparation, but there's still uncertainty about how things will go tomorrow. Emergency surgery, emergency work must proceed. What else will happen and how? Nita Blake-Person reports.
Wellingtonian Cara Locke is 41 weeks pregnant and she's ready for her baby to arrive.
Unfortunately, the baby doesn't want to leave his accommodation, so it's looking like I'm going to have to be induced, and we were hoping that I could be induced on Thursday, but obviously that's the day of the nurses' strike. So I'm now booked in for Saturday, but basically I will have to have a different midwife to the midwife who's treated me throughout my pregnancy, which is a bit disappointing, obviously, because I have a really good relationship with my midwife.
While Ms Locke fully supports the nurses' strike, she says it's poor timing for her personally.
It definitely makes me nervous. If baby was to come tomorrow, I definitely would be nervous about the level of care that I would receive, but I understand that all the different DHBs have got a plan in place and they've assured people that there'll be the adequate care. So I'm sure I would receive adequate care, but it still makes me a little bit nervous if I was to go into labour tomorrow. If only baby had come when he was supposed to.
It's estimated up to 8,000 elective procedures have been deferred as a result of the strikes. The Executive Director of the Specialist Doctors Union, ASMS, Ian Powell, says there's been plenty of planning from DHBs to try to ensure things run smoothly as possible at hospitals.
There won't be that many patients admitted. There will still be patients in the hospital, but it'll be rather like a Christmas Day without the festivities. It ought to be very quiet in that sense. But we just don't know what's going to happen. So there will probably be more doctors around, but doctors are not nurses.
But Ian Powell acknowledges there's never been a strike on this scale before.
We've had strikes of resident or junior doctors before, but they would represent probably less than 5% of the workforce. Nurses are closer to 60%, so that's an enormous difference. And we haven't had a strike of this magnitude for over 30 years. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
But Wellington Accident and Urgent Medical Centre manager Margaret Kernow says patients deemed not to be urgent by hospitals are likely to be referred to clinics like hers.
It could be a busier day than normal, but really we don't know because we have no idea how many people simply won't go to ED because they know about the strike.
The Nurses Union is providing thousands of members to work throughout the strikes to ensure life-preserving services can continue, and contingency plans are in place for a major emergency such as an earthquake. The strike will begin at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning and run through until 7 on Friday morning. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake-Person, aho.
First they were lost, then they were found, then it became a question of whether they could be rescued. 12 schoolboys whose football team was called the Wild Boars, and their coach, a young man who didn't keep them out of trouble but certainly kept them alive once they were in it. It was a story of kindness, of bravery and of loss. One of the rescue team died whilst working, of course, and it ended with something that felt almost magically good. All of the lost boys and their coach making it out. It's been revealed the boys were given anti-anxiety medication to avoid panic on their journeys through the narrow and flooded caves, and one by one they did rejoin the world. Joy from onlookers as the last rescuers involved in freeing the final 4 schoolboys and their soccer coach emerged from inside the flooded caves after successfully ending a perilous mission that gripped the world for 2.5 weeks. Today, volunteers who'd worked to drain water from the cave were amongst those celebrating. Rock climber Suti Samat helped authorities search the chimneys inside the cave for the missing schoolboys.
We the most happy is that the first time we heard that the boys we found them groups, so that the most happy that we already had. And after that, through the time now everyone is leave the cave. Okay, so I mean this. Plan project is a success.
A multinational crew of more than 1,000 people all up had been involved in the search and rescue missions after the boys first went missing on June 23rd. British diver Jonathan Vollanthen was the first to find them.
How many of you? 13. Brilliant.
His mother Jill said whilst immensely proud, she'd been anxious for her son after former Navy diver Saman Gunan lost his life delivering air into the caves. She said Jonathan had sent her just one email during the previous week.
I think he probably sent one when the gentleman lost his life just to reassure us that he was okay. But it also pointed out to the rest of the rescuers that it is a difficult mission. And I was also concerned after the first entry to rescue the boys. They were going in again the next day, but fortunately they've done it 3 days and they're all out now.
The governor of Chiang Rai said the final 4 boys and their coach rescued overnight had joined their 8 teammates in hospital, where they would remain for at least a week in quarantine. He said with permission from doctors, parents were permitted to visit and see their children through a glass panel until they were all well enough to be physically reunited. As the news went global, American entrepreneur Elon Musk, US President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May joined a happy Twitter chorus congratulating the rescue team, whilst the Manchester United Football Club extended an invitation to the Wild Boars, that's the team's name, to visit them at Old Trafford. And there was also an invitation to go to the Football World Cup final in Russia this weekend, although medical staff said that is not going to happen. The boys were mostly in surprisingly good health. 2 are suspected to have mild pneumonia, 1 has a slow heartbeat, and another is recovering from a foot injury. Jill Vollanthen says her son hopes to return to the UK soon.
That was my first feeling of relief that they'd found them. Again, not realising how much effort and teamwork, which is so important, it took to get them out. And thank God they're all out safely. And they have my love, and I'm delighted for them all.
The cave, which is expected to eventually become a tourist attraction, although albeit with some areas roped off and obviously good rain warnings applying, has been temporarily closed. Is now taking place up there. CNN's Ivan Watkin is there. He'll join us live later in the program. He's been filing wonderfully from the scene for CNN and he'll be with us in the next hour or so. It's coming up to 20 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. More now on the story about the late Te Awanuiarangi Black, who's been outed by his widow as a pedophile. A tauranga iwi Nai Te Rangi says it will pay an $11,000 cash reward for anyone with information about the claims who comes forward. It's been 4 days now since Anihira Black posted a Facebook video in which she claimed Mr. Black was part of a child sex ring in Tauranga. She made a passionate plea for his victims to speak out, but police say no one has come forward to them. This story by Te Aniwa Hurihanganui starts with a part of Anihira Black's video.
We give you permission to speak your truth. Take back the power of the secret. It has no power in the light. Give yourself permission to be heard. Be it a whisper or a blood-curdling scream, just be heard.
Despite Anihira Black's plea to potential victims of her late ex-husband, no victim has yet been identified to police. But Tauranga Iwi Ngai Te Rangi is taking matters into its own hands. Its chief executive, Paula Stanley, says they're offering cash for anyone to come forward with information.
So I asked my chair to see whether we could put up a sum of money for anybody who could bring information to the table. When he asked me how much, I said, well, 10K, and I'll pull out $1,000 out of my own pocket and throw it in and make it 11.
The iwi chair, Charlie Tafiao, says they are deeply concerned by the allegations and claims of a child sex ring in Tauranga. He says they'll do what it takes to find out if it's true.
We don't know whether it will help, but what we want to do is do everything we can to encourage people with information to come forward as soon as possible.
Mr. Stanley says he worked in the prisons for 6 years, and during that time he exposed 2 pedophiles to authorities after seeing them work at schools. He says a lot is at stake.
It's a desperate attempt, but we've got to do something because there's no information coming about. We've got to find out, the veracity of this allegation. And I have my children, my mukos all live in this city. I want to know that they're going to be safe.
Anihira Black would not be interviewed by RNZ, but it is understood that she is pleased with the reward for information. The police say the $11,000 offer is a matter for the iwi. In a statement released this afternoon, police say no victims have come forward or been identified. Tauranga's Deputy Mayor Calvin Clout says the allegations have shocked the community, but the council hasn't formally spoken about it.
Obviously, the community needs to be concerned, and I'm sure this is not a Tauranga only or Bay of Plenty only issue. The issue of sexual abuse and people sort of being undercover and going underground is obviously a nationwide issue.
The Facebook video has been viewed close to 390,000 times now. Ngai Te Rangi is hoping others will contribute money to grow the reward to get to the bottom of allegations that are still sending waves through the Bay of Plenty. For Checkpoint, I'm Te Aniwa Hurihanganui.
23 minutes past 5. The police say they've been left gobsmacked by the behaviour of 3 young people who stole a car and drove it at high speed the wrong way down Auckland's southern motorway today. 2 females aged 18 and 12 and a 15-year-old boy are in police custody after the incident, during which the car also crashed into a police vehicle and a truck. The police say it's lucky no one was injured this time. Our reporter Sarah Robson has the details.
The police area commander, Inspector Dave Glossop, says officers tried to stop a stolen vehicle in Pukekohe at about 10 o'clock this morning. It didn't stop and drove onto the southern motorway, heading in the wrong direction.
What was the most terrifying part of this for everybody concerned is that not only did it enter the motorway going the wrong way, but it actually was, if you can understand, in the fast lane going the wrong way. So, just the most dangerous, stupid move that's just possibly imaginable.
Because of the danger to the public, Mr. Glossop says the police stopped their chase. Instead, the car was monitored at a distance by the police helicopter. Mr. Glossop says the driver wouldn't have known they were still being watched.
And it was still continuing to drive in this reckless and dangerous manner. And the vehicle then has decided to do a U-turn and drive in the right direction, believing that it was probably would get away with what it had been doing. Police were able to, at that stage, know it was safer, able to move in and stop the vehicle.
Before the car was stopped, it crashed into a police dog ute and a truck. The 3 people who were in the car, 2 females aged 18 and 12 and a 15-year-old boy, are being dealt with by the police. Even after a 30-year career, Mr Glossop says he's still shocked by what happened.
Vehicles are travelling down the motorway at 100 kilometres an hour, and when you've got a car in the fast lane going the wrong way heading towards those vehicles at 100 kilometres an hour, impact would be fatal. No doubt about that. Police who are involved in pursuit, the staff from the Eagle helicopter, everybody just gobsmacked that people would be just so stupid.
Today's incident follows a number in recent months involving young people in stolen cars being chased by the police. In April, 2 18-year-olds were arrested after a police chase in central Auckland. In May, 15-year-old Bailey Patmore died in the boot of a stolen car after a chase north of Wellington. Less than 2 weeks later, 15-year-old Ehire Maxwell and his passenger, 12-year-old Meadow James, died in a police pursuit in Palmerston North. Mr Glossop says he's disappointed young people have once again put their lives and the lives of others at risk.
This is such a wicked problem. There's no easy solution here because on this occasion, as soon as there was arrest of the public, the police ended the pursuit. But it just shows that some of these people will keep making dangerous decisions and will just keep driving in the same manner, whether the police are behind them or not.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
26 minutes past 5. Right to the football now, and it's France against who? We're talking about the World Cup final, of course, and this morning, semi-final 1 saw France beat Belgium 1-0. Not the goal fest we'd predicted and hoped for on Checkpoint, but both teams defended like their lives were depending on it. It was a game of intensity, skill and feeling, just not many goals. The BBC's Tim Allman reports from St Petersburg.
When you get to this stage of a World Cup, anything seems possible.
We're from Belgium! We're from Belgium!
Spirits were high, the odd spirit was consumed as fans looked forward to the match. Whether you were in red or blue, you were hoping.
Je pense que la France a beaucoup de chance d'aller en finale.
I think France have a good chance of getting to the final. After a slow start, we are getting stronger. We will beat our Belgian neighbours, our Belgian friends, then a great party, and straight on to Moscow.
Et ensuite, direction Moscou.
We play the final, we have to win the cup, because we're now so far, now we have to do it. We know that we had a really good team in the past, but there was always something, and now is the moment to win the cup.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, this was what they would call a cagey game. But when chances did come, both goalkeepers rose to the challenge. Eventually, though, a breakthrough. Early in the second half, Samuel Umtiti leapt up, putting the French ahead.
Griezmann with the corner, kicking Umtiti! Arriving on the near post! There's the breakthrough! It's Samuel Umtiti for France! And France now can sniff the World Cup final.
That was all they needed. France back in a World Cup final for the first time in 12 years. In Paris, there was pandemonium. It felt like an entire nation had come out to celebrate.
We feel a lot of joy. We're really happy. We knew they were going to win. It was perfect.
I experienced this 20 years ago. I told my kids about it. Now they're grown-ups. It's going to be my second final, and I hope my second victory.
At the Champs-Élysées, a sea of supporters, all with dreams of glory. France will now be favourites for the Cup. Only Croatia or England can stop them.
Or England. Tim Allman with that report. In the second semi-final, as Tim was saying, Croatia take on England in Moscow. That's at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, New Zealand time. And as Tim said, obviously the winner will play France in the final. Just before we move on for our friends in Christchurch, a crash on Johns Road. It's down to one lane northbound near the intersection with Sawyers Arms Road. Road users are advised to take extra care. Delays are possible. Avoid the area if you can. And if you're wondering what the hell is going on there, there's a crash on Johns Road near the intersection with Sawyers Arms. It's not quite 6:30. Katrina Batten, are you ready? Brace yourself, KB. US President Donald Trump has touched down in Brussels and says the UK is in turmoil ahead of the NATO summit. Everyone's in turmoil. Joseph Parker on his next flight, his new baby daughter, and his bid to provide sporting equipment to children in the Pacific Islands. And RNZ gets an extra $4.5 million in funding. All of that coming up before 6 o'clock. We'd love your feedback. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Ladies and gentlemen, wait a sec. It's 5:30.
Wow. District health boards are very disappointed and annoyed. Tomorrow nurses' strike has not been called off. Up to 30,000 nurses will walk off the job in the morning at 7 o'clock. About 3,500 elective surgeries have been deferred and outpatient appointments are also postponed. The DHB say they're well prepared for the strike action and anyone with an emergency should not hesitate to go to hospital. A new report has revealed the extent of verbal and physical abuse that children have suffered at early childhood education centres. The Ministry of Education received nearly 340 complaints last year and nearly half were upheld. It says the number of accusations of abuse or neglect has risen. In one case, a child was left with a dislocated shoulder after being roughly handled by a teacher. The police are shocked by the stupidity of 3 teenagers who stole a car and drove it at high speed the wrong way down Auckland's southern motorway today. 2 females aged 18 and 12 and a 15-year-old boy are in police custody after the frightening drive against traffic travelling towards them at 100 kilometres an hour. At one stage, the stolen car crashed into a police ute and then a truck. The police can't believe no one was injured or killed. A woman says she phoned the council in tears to complain about an Auckland property developer 17 years before he was finally jailed for polluting the environment. Louise Richardson lived next door to a Mount Eden property Quo Lau was managing in 2001. She says 12 people were living in the 2-bedroom home and there was rotting rubbish left in the driveway and building going on day and night. The council says it's now better resourced and skilled to deal with complex investigations. Tauranga's deputy mayor says claims that a local iwi leader was a pedophile who preyed on children for years have shocked the community. Te Awanuiarangi Black's widow, Anihira Black, also says her husband ran a child sex ring in Tauranga. The Deputy Mayor, Kelvin Clout, says potential victims should come forward and the council will pass any information on to police. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Yeah, we've got more on that rogue property developer coming up and the claims that people have been reporting him to the council for ages. But let's turn to business news now with Matt Chatterton. Matt, one of the measures of the property market and how ridiculously expensive it is the relation of house prices to household income, right? Wages, what people are earning and what homes cost. What's the latest ratio you have?
Yeah, well, we've got details that house prices are now 9 times annual wages. So this comes from the Massey University's Home Affordability Report that was conducted between March and May, and that actually shows that housing affordability continues to decline. Graham Squires, who was the author of the report, he says overall houses are becoming less affordable and the gap between house prices and wages continues to widen. Most regions saw an increase in house price growth. However, there was a small decline in high-value areas like Central Otago, so Queenstown, Auckland and Hawke's Bay. House prices in Northland, Wellington, Otago and Manawatu increased. Mr. Squires, or Professor Squires rather, believes the reason for that is because the likes of people in Auckland and Queenstown have decided enough is enough and moved to new regions that are cheaper.
Yeah. Speaking of academics, a finance academic is demanding the Reserve Bank provide more information from the country's trading banks about how sound they are. What's going on here, Matt?
Yeah, so the Reserve Bank stress tested the 4 major bank retailers' resilience to major economic downturn. You may remember the story from earlier in the week / last week. The Reserve Bank concluded that they would remain solvent. It says the results suggest the banks as a group would be able to carry significant losses without breaching their minimum capital requirements. It's currently reviewing how much banks would have to hold in reserves and capital, and it's willing to let them decide, but with no certain conditions. However, David Tripe from Massey University School of Economics and Finance says the results didn't give individual assessments of the banks, and their customers have a right to know how risky they are or even how rigorous this test actually was. When or if we get a glimpse at this information from the Reserve Bank is up in the air. It is meant to be announced announcing another international measuring stick for how well the banks will cope later in the year. So there's a level of independence in the testing. We may know more about it then.
Thanks, Matt. I think that is worth following up on. Thank you. What happened on the markets today?
Yeah, well, the NZX actually closed down for the third day in a row. It narrowly remains in the 9,000s at 9,001. The US dollar is down to 68.1 cents following the news out of Washington that President Trump plans on a further $200 billion worth of tariffs against China. That is a 0.3 cent drop today. Australia is up 91.9 cents and the Great British Pound is down to 51.4.
Matt Chatterton, thank you very much indeed. Matty mentioned the US President Donald Trump. Well, he's touched down in Brussels for what's expected to be a testy old summit as he tries to persuade NATO members to spend more on defence. As he left the US, he predicted dealing with NATO and the Europeans will be harder than his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin next week. He also said the UK, which he's visiting next, was in turmoil, his word, and he spoke very fondly of Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, who of course has just resigned. In short, it's the unpredictability business as usual, and the question is, how will Europe cope? From Brussels, here's the BBC's Europe editor, Katja Adler.
The United States' self-appointed deal-maker-in-chief has landed on European soil. Long awaited, but also kind of dreaded by his allies here, who wonder after the Iran deal and the climate change accord, will NATO be the next transatlantic agreement to be trampled by President Trump? His tweets this morning weren't exactly encouraging. NATO numbers don't add up for US taxpayers, he fumed. He's not wrong in terms of domestic military spending. President Trump points to Europeans as the worst offenders. The US always tops military spending charts. This year, 7 European countries will hit NATO's target of 2% of GDP. But a host of others come nowhere near, including 3 of the EU's biggest economies, Germany, Italy and France. Forget decades of peace and transatlantic partnership. NATO's Secretary-General has honed in on cash and flattery ahead of tomorrow's summit in the hope of persuading Donald Trump of NATO's merits.
NATO is a good deal for all 29 allies. I have thanked President Trump for his leadership on defense spending, and it is having a clear impact. All allies have stopped the cuts, all allies have started to increase, and more allies spend 2% of GDP on defense.
Donald Trump's ambivalence towards NATO and his general unpredictability has Europeans spooked and feeling exposed. They've relied on the US for security since the Second World War, but feel now nothing can be taken for granted. Fearing Russia, cyber attacks and cross-border terror, the EU is now beginning modestly to boost its own defence capabilities. Today, EU leaders signed a cooperation agreement with NATO, with some blunt European words for the US president.
Dear President Trump, America does not have and will not have a better ally than Europe. Today, Europeans spend on defense many times more than Russia and as much as China. Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many.
At NATO headquarters, a packed agenda awaits leaders tomorrow, but a show of unity is what really matters most. The question hanging heavy here, will Donald Trump deliver?
That was Katja Adler for the BBC in Brussels. Obviously, we will follow President Trump as he moves around Europe. Now, last night we spoke to our court reporter, Edward Gay, about Ikior Lau, who was also known as Augustine Lau, who was yesterday jailed for 2 years for repeatedly breaching the Resource Management Act and the Building Act. Lau was an Auckland property developer who appeared to regard the RMA as irrelevant and ignored it with such alacrity. The sentencing judge said it was the worst such case he'd seen before handing down the longest jail sentence ever given for RMA offending. On the face of it, it was a clear and significant victory for the Auckland Council. But last night, as we were telling you about this, we received a significant amount of feedback asking why it had all taken so long. In short, Mr. Lau was known to some of you, surprisingly many of you, and you all said none of this was new. In one email, a listener told us she complained to the council about the rogue property developer years before it finally took meaningful action. So here's Edward Gay again.
Louise Richardson lived next door to a Mount Eden property Augustine Lau was managing back in 2001. She says at one point Lau had 12 people living in the two-bedroom bungalow that he carved up into 4 units.
And there was coming and going and revving engines and shouting and drunkenness and ongoing building work during the night with circular saws and drilling. He raised the beautiful orchard at the back and left a muddy, stagnant mess, and I think he had plans to subdivide, but that never ended up happening.
Miss Richardson had a toddler and a newborn baby at the time.
It was utter hell, and the council was really unhelpful. I would call them most days in tears, absolutely desperate to try and get the place closed down or get something done, and they just wouldn't acknowledge the issues, and occasionally they would send someone out to inspect the site, but nothing ever seemed to happen.
She said her 3-year-old son's bedroom looked out onto the driveway of Lau's house next door.
It wasn't uncommon to see rotten meat and used sanitary products littered out there, and he couldn't sleep through the night. He'd never been a good sleeper anyway, and he found the constant noise very upsetting. So, yeah, a nightmare.
She said the council wasn't interested in her complaints, and it was only resolved when the property was sold and eventually reverted back to a family home.
Well, I'm glad that they finally threw the book at him and that he's now clapped in irons. That pleases me immensely. But I'll always feel very disappointed and let down, really, because we were just good citizens and minding our own business on our lovely property. And we went through all that hell and no one was prepared to help us.
Auckland Council's Regulatory Compliance Manager, Steve Pearce, says Miss Richardson's complaints predate his time at the council, but much has changed since then.
2001 compliance was a relatively new field in the RMA or planning space. It was relatively untouched. Now we've got quite a profession around being compliance practitioners or compliance professionals. We're certainly better resourced and we're certainly better skilled and able to deal with complex investigations like this.
Mr Pearce says the Lau case represents about 2 to 3 years' work for 2 officers to get the case ready for prosecution.
If you were to ring up now and talk about something which clearly has a significant harm on a community, on a neighbourhood, on the environment, we have officers around the city, around the entire region who are able to go and respond to that.
He says the 2-year prison sentence handed down at the Auckland District Court yesterday sends a message.
If you're going to be a serial offender, if you're going to completely wreck our environment and ignore council's directions, the court will find you liable and you will end up with some pretty serious penalties.
Mr Pearce says Lau's offending is the worst of its kind and cost the Auckland Council $1 million to clean up. That included stopping sewage seeping into nearby streams. At one of the properties, Lau used soil that contained rubbish and asbestos to level off the ground.
We had to go out there. It was basically slipping down into an estuary, and obviously raw asbestos just sitting there wasn't acceptable. So we had to step in there, go and clean it up, get it to a point where it's safe for people to be near it.
But Mr Pearce said the council hopes to recover some of the costs, and caveats have been put on the properties, so when they're sold, it will receive some of the money. He encourages anyone who sees developments that appear dubious to get in touch with council so they can be investigated. Lau's partner, Jiawin Mao, also faces charges under the Resource Management Act. She's due to be sentenced next month. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gay ahau.
Plans to close more tracks across the North Island to help prevent the spread of Kauri dieback are being criticised for not going far enough. The Department of Conservation is proposing 34 full or partial track closures across Northland, Coromandel, Great Barrier Island and Tauranga. The time for people to give feedback has been extended until next month. Tom Furley reports.
Large parts of the Waitakere Ranges on Auckland's doorstep have been closed since May as the council and local iwi Te Kawerau Amaki battle the disease that's fatal to kauri. Under DOC's latest plan, 24 tracks across Hauraki, Bay of Islands, Northland and Tauranga will be fully closed and 10 partially closed. Northland conservation advocate at Forest and Bird, Dean Bajent Mercer, says it won't stop the disease spreading.
They mainly are talking about small tracks with hardly anyone going on them. And yes, they need to be closed, but so do all the other tracks in Kauri forests. One of the main areas that have been missed is the Te Araroa National Walking Track, which goes through a lot of the northern Kauri forests. And at the moment, at this time of year, there's big mud pies through them. And through mud is how this invisible disease is being distributed into Kauri forests.
Dean Bajent Mercer says all the tracks in the Kauri forests should be closed now while the disease is assessed and tracks are upgraded. However, the head of the charitable trust Coromandel Kauri Dieback Forum, Jason Roxburgh, says anything that can help is a good thing, and he supports the move.
A lot of them are relatively low-use tracks, but that said, they also go through some pretty significant Kauri stands. As far as I understand it, the approach that the Department of Conservation is taking is the higher use tracks they're looking to upgrade to the point where they've mitigated the risk of Kauri dieback getting in.
In the build-up to the closure of the popular Waitakere Ranges, many were concerned their hobbies and recreation would suffer. The head of the Auckland Tramping Club, Tony Walton, says he wants to protect Kauri, but activities will be affected. He says some members see it as an excuse to close rundown tracks or cut down on maintenance costs.
So there's this feeling that the Kauri dieback program is being sort of used as almost as an excuse to close some of these tracks when in fact sensible mitigation measures could be introduced which would ensure the tracks would remain open.
Tony Walton says some of the tracks that could be closed are used far more often than people think. The Department of Conservation says the decision to close tracks isn't taken lightly. People have until August 10th to give feedback. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. The time is coming up to 14 minutes to 6. Let's return now to a mission which a week ago seemed almost impossible. The extraordinary rescue of the wild boar football team and their coach after 2.5 weeks trapped in a cave 4 kilometres underground. The group has now been reunited and is recovering in hospital after the last 5 team members, that included the coach of course, were brought to safety around midnight New Zealand time last night. CNN correspondent Ivan Watson was there last night as they came out, and he's on the line now. Ivan, thank you so much for being with us. What was that like as the last of them came out?
You know, it was really incredible to see the scenes in the provincial capital of Chiang Rai as the ambulances were rushing in to the hospital. There were crowds cheering as the last of the boys were brought in, the coach, the 13th member, the lone adult who had been with them from the beginning, and then the Navy SEAL divers and doctor from Thailand who spent more than a week in the cave, in that air pocket, helping keep these kids alive when the rescuers, made it to the hospital for treatment as well. So this has been a remarkable moment of relief and pride and joy, I think, for the Kingdom of Thailand. I think there were a lot of tears of joy around this country upon the news of everybody's safe escape.
Yeah, it's an absolutely wonderful story, although, of course, a rescuer was lost, a very brave man who went into those terrifying caves, I would have thought, flooded, narrow, winding, and didn't make it out alive. So that was a moment of tragedy. It was also a moment in which we all realised, I think, how difficult the task of getting them out was. And it went so well, it was kind of overwhelming. There's a lovely piece of footage of you online as you were sort of taken aback by how successfully the rescuers were going.
Yeah, I think that far too often we are reporting as journalists on tragedies, on awful events that take place around the world. And this rescue effort did not look like it was going to go so well for a long time. And it's very right to raise the memory of that former Thai Royal Navy SEAL diver who had left the service and volunteered to be part of the rescue effort and ran there and died. In fact, the commander of the rescue operation, the former governor of this province, in his press conference last night, he called for a round of applause for Sergeant Sam, as the man is affectionately known here. So that was probably the most tragic of the many setbacks that the trapped football team and the rescuers faced. An incredible more than 2 weeks of this effort. There were other problems. They were running low. Oxygen levels were going down in the cavern where the kids were trapped. They didn't succeed in setting up a phone line that they wanted to set up to the boys. Then there were the torrential rains that helped create the initial problem in the first place. There were many obstacles, and incredibly, they were surmounted, though one brave hero gave his life in the process.
Yeah. Ivan, when will the boys be reunited with the parents? I know that they've seen each other now through glass, but when will they be able to hug and be together?
That's being staggered, because remember that 4 boys were rescued on Sunday evening, 4 more on Monday, and then 4 more on Tuesday with their 25-year-old coach. So as each group of boys, kind of their medical condition improves, and the Thai doctors say that they're all in the quote-unquote safety zone, their parents are being allowed, baby steps to get closer and closer to the boys. First, see them through a glass door, and then get within 2 meters of them while wearing kind of surgical masks and hospital smocks. And then the next step, the doctors say that they've done blood tests, that the white blood cell counts have dropped, and that the actual moment when the boys are going to be able to hug their moms and dads, that is coming soon.
Ivan, thank you. You, David, and your colleagues have been so generous with your crosses to RNZ this week. We really appreciate it. It's been a privilege and, in the end, a real pleasure to talk to you all. Ivan Watson from CNN. CNN have just made themselves readily available throughout the week from the scene, and we're very grateful for it. RNZ relies on the generosity of people like that doing crosses for us. We also rely on public funding, and RNZ will receive an extra $4.5 million this financial year. The Broadcasting Minister was at pains to point out, though, this is just the first step for the transformation of the public broadcaster, and her vision of a standalone television service is still alive. Of the $15 million allocated in the May budget, RNZ will get less than a third. The rest of the money will go into a new innovation fund and to New Zealand On Air. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Labour campaigned on an extra $38 million a year for New Zealand programming and journalism, including a funding boost for RNZ. The Minister, Claire Curran, says this money is just the start.
We can't do all of this at once, so we're prioritising the evolution of RNZ.
The Chief Executive of RNZ, Paul Thompson, says the funding boost is good news.
The $4.5 million, which is direct to us, it's like a dose of steroids. It's going to allow us to go faster and stronger with our current planning and the things that we want to do. We will be reporting some outstanding audience figures tomorrow, so the organisation's really performing.
But the issue of whether or not the policy will eventually include a standalone television service for RNZ remains unresolved. The Minister says it's still in her long-term plan.
This is the beginning of a process. The plan has not changed. It can't all be done in one budget, and there's more work to be done.
So is that still your vision eventually?
My vision remains the same.
Mr Thompson says RNZ will deal with the television service if and when it becomes a reality.
Obviously hearing clearly that it remains a long-term aspiration of the government, and as such it's not something there's any concrete detail around, and I can only deal with things as they become more real. But our position has always been that we're interested in multimedia content, and a very strong component on that is strong video storytelling.
Michael Stiasny heads the advisory group that made the recommendations about the funding split. He says its conclusion is a television service is not feasible in the short term, as there are other more immediate priorities.
We have very large Maori population that has not got te reo or any of those other issues as well founded as it should have. We've got a responsibility to the Pacific, and indeed a lot of our people have ties to the Pacific. So those are really important things that we need to deal with urgently, because every day
they should be a priority rather than
we lose those, we're never getting them back. Te reo disappears, it's all over.
He says there's a major opportunity for media companies to work more closely together.
Not only those in the public area, but actually those in the private area as well. And what if you had a vision, what we would really like to see is, because resourcing is scarce, we could envisage a environment where every media organisation, publicly owned, privately owned, working together to best use the resource to get an outcome.
The advisory group will provide the Minister with further advice later this year about the functions, role, scope and initial membership of the Permanent Public Media Funding Commission. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
To some sport now, and Joseph Parker resumes his boxing career in a fortnight from Sunday in his first fight since his first ever loss. That was against Anthony Joshua. Of course, this time he's heading to London's O2 Arena to fight Dillian Whyte, a boxer with an identical record to his own. If Parker wins, he gets to play with the big boys again. If he loses, his career will become less lucrative. Winning pays. Parker's fight against Joshua was worth over $10 million, the biggest single payday in New Zealand sporting history. But you only earn that kind of money if you're fighting the champ. Joseph Parker, a Samoan Kiwi from Mangere, is currently in training in Las Vegas and back in Auckland. In his absence, his second daughter, Shiloh Jasmine, has just been born.
You know, I'm not there for the birth, and I'm looking forward to meeting her. But she's a very cute baby, and I can't wait to meet her after my next fight.
And you weren't there for Elizabeth's birth either, were you?
I've missed both births, and luckily I have a very supportive partner who, no, she's very supportive, and she knows I'm doing this for family and for the future. So she's very supportive, and I really do appreciate it. But I'm excited to get business done, head back, and then be a family again.
Yeah, the business is to fight against Dillian Whyte on the 29th of July. He, like you, has only had one loss, and he, like you, only had that loss to Joshua. So this is going to be a hell of a fight, isn't it?
This is going to be a tremendous fight. I feel like this fight is going to be, he's hungry to be world champion. I want to be champion again. And, we're both young, we're both fit, strong. Going into this fight, I got a different mentality. I'm going into this fight to, I'm not going to move as much like the last fight. I'm going to throw a lot of punches and bunches, and I'm going to make it exciting because this fight can change a lot of things.
What have you learned as a result of that fight against Joshua?
I think the biggest learning for myself was I left the ring knowing I could have done more. And so for the next fight, for future fights, when I leave the ring, I'm going to say to myself, I did everything I could to win. So I thought I didn't leave it all in the ring. And that's sort of something that I'm going to work on improving with future fights.
I know you talked a lot in your camp about the occasion, but once you were actually out there, was it more awe-inspiring, over-awing than you thought it would be? Was it bigger than you'd expected?
To be totally honest, it's one of the fights that I've actually been I walked out and I had no fears, I had no nerves, I wasn't even scared. I was just so excited to be part of the occasion. And when I got out there, I focused on movement, I focused on not being hit. I should have done more hitting, but just the whole occasion was so enjoyable that I want to be part of another big event like that again.
And if you beat Dillian Whyte, and if you beat him well, then that's very much on the cards. He, of course, is doing trash talk. He's talking. I was just reading about hacking you to bits.
Listen, there's a lot of fighters that approach fights differently. I like to approach the fight. Sometimes we say things to hype it up, but most of the time we like to approach that we leave all the training, and then when we get to the ring, we want to do the damage in the ring. Some fighters like to talk it up, and they actually get confidence by talking themselves up leading up to the fight. So if that's the way he approaches it, they got on him. But when it does go down, I know that I'm going to put a lot of hurt on him.
How seriously do you take your role as a role model in the Pacific, both in New Zealand and in Samoa, where you are absolutely adored and admired? How important is that stuff to you?
It's to be a role model is very important, and to be honest, there's a lot of people that want to be role models, but they're not in the position to be a role model. So for me, I'm blessed to be in this position, and I know there's a lot of kids and a lot of youth that look up to myself. So it's important not only to just be a good person or just be let's say kind to everyone, be nice to everyone, and those are natural things. But for me, being a role model, with this new thing that we're working on with Team Parker, the initiative, for me, it's important to be a role model and to give back to those who support you, but also those who are trying to achieve things in their own lives. And we've got so much talent down outside of the world. We just need to put them on the world stage.
So this is a social enterprise where essentially if you buy one, they get one free, starting in Samoa, and I've been there, and you know, I've watched, you know, children kick round rugby balls that were flat, that were years old, children playing in bare feet because they didn't have boots. So the idea is that you get equipment to kids.
That's the idea, and I'm very thankful that I have a great team in New Zealand working very hard while I'm here training, and that's the reason why we're able to sort of get it started. The goal is to, you know, sell the clothing, but also for a piece of clothing that's been bought, we're going to donate a piece of sporting equipment. And luckily, we're partnered with Rebel Sport and Pass It Forward initiative, because as a team, we want to do our best to not only donate sporting equipment, but in the future, we want to expand, and we want to expand to all the other islands. We want to give scholarships, we want to give rugby boots, we want to give this and that. So we want to, but we're starting off small, but we want to make it very big in the future to help all those in the islands.
Joseph Parker, who's up in Vegas getting ready for his big fight at the O2 Arena in London Sunday fortnight. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. KB's next with the news, but first, the Pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. DHBs are continuing to try and reach a resolution with the Nurses Union, but tomorrow's strike is going ahead. They're very disappointed and annoyed the action hasn't been called off and are awaiting a decision from the Employment Relations Authority about the ongoing pay dispute. Up to 30,000 nurses will down tools at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. 3,500 elective surgeries have been deferred and outpatient appointments are also postponed. The Employment Relations Authority has been facilitating talks but is yet to make a recommendation. The DHB's spokesperson, Helen Mason, says they're looking forward to hearing what the ERA has to say.
The facilitator has considered the matters from both parties' perspectives, is very, very well versed in the issues, has absolutely heard nurses' concerns, as have DHBs.
Helen Mason says any recommendation from the ERA is not binding. A government report has detailed verbal and physical abuse that children have suffered at early childhood education centres, including one having their shoulder dislocated. The Ministry of Education received nearly 340 complaints against individual services last year, and nearly half were upheld. Jessie Chang reports.
One child was left with a dislocated shoulder after being roughly handled by a teacher. The staff member was later dismissed and charged with assault. Other complaints included isolating children, problems with health and safety policies, and poor hygiene levels. The ministry says the number of complaints about abuse or neglect has increased compared to previous years. It says this is partly due to tighter requirements around reporting abuse. Jessie Chang, TNA.
The man accused of murdering two-year-old Annika Savage can now be named. He's 32-year-old Tewi Daniel Savage, the girl's father. Annika's body was found in the Rangataiki River in Bay of Plenty a week and a half ago. Mr Savage has pleaded not guilty to her murder. The pair lived in the settlement of Te Mahoi near the Matahina Dam. Mr Savage has been remanded in custody and is due back in court in September. Plans to close dozens of native bush tracks across the North Island are being criticised as not going far enough. The Department of Conservation has proposed 34 full or partial track closures in areas including Waikato, Coromandel, Hauraki, Great Barrier Island, Whangarei, Tauranga and the Bay of Islands. A Northland conservation advocate at Forest and Bird, Dean Bagent Mercer, wants all tracks closed.
I've been really surprised that the proposals don't go nearly far enough. There's only small tracks that are proposed to be closed with hardly anyone going on them. And yes, they need to be closed, but so do all the other tracks in Kauri Forest.
Dean Bagent Mercer from Forest and Bird. The Chief Executive of RNZ says the new funding announced today will be like a dose of steroids for the public broadcaster. Out of the $15 million allocated in the May budget, RNZ will get $4.5 million this financial year. The rest will go into a new innovation fund and to New Zealand On Air. The Minister, Claire Curran, says this is just the first step for RNZ and she'll be seeking more money in next year's budget. RNZ's Paul Thompson says the funding boost is good news.
The $4.5 million, which is direct to us, it's like a dose of steroids. It's going to allow us to go faster and stronger with our current planning and the things that we want to do. We will be reporting some outstanding audience figures tomorrow, so the organisation's really performing.
Paul Thompson. The funding allocations are based on recommendations from a ministerial advisory group. International praise is being heaped on Thailand and the cave rescuers for pulling off the extraordinary feat of bringing all of those trapped underground for more than a fortnight to safety. For 3 days, Thai military and international divers guided the youngsters individually to the surface through narrow flooded passageways. Their 25-year-old coach, who was last out, helped keep the boys calm using meditation. Thailand's ambassador to Australia, Nantana Sivakua, says the dramatic events have united her country.
This is something that people of the whole country come together, whether on what ideology they believe in, but this is something that they forget all of that and come together. And I think that's not only in Thailand, but all over the world.
Thailand's ambassador to Australia, Nantana Sivakua. The latest housing affordability study by Massey University shows house prices are now 9 times annual wages. The report's author, Associate Professor Graham Squires, says overall houses are becoming less affordable. While most regions saw an increase in house price growth, there was a decline in high-value areas like Central Otago, Auckland and Hawke's Bay. But house prices in Northland, Wellington, Otago and Manawatu increased. Mr Squires says buyers moving to more affordable areas may be responsible for the growth in the regions. It's 6:05. Sport. The Chiefs assistant coach Tumbai Matson insists it hasn't been hard to motivate their players ahead of Friday night's Super Rugby derby against the Hurricanes. With both teams already through to the playoffs, there won't be as much on the line as there might have been. However, Matson says the likelihood that it's veteran flanker Liam Messham's last game in Hamilton and the drive to play well for their fans has ensured they're well and truly up for the match.
Anytime they have the opportunity to put on the jersey at home, I think there's just too much pride. I think from both sides too. The Hurricanes aren't going to come up here with a half-hearted effort. So, no, we've had a really good intense training week.
The Argentinian tennis player Juan Martín del Potro is expecting a closer game when he meets Rafael Nadal in the Wimbledon quarterfinals tonight. Del Potro lost to Spanish star Nadal in straight sets at last month's French Open.
I will try to hold my service games the most of the time, and then if I want to beat him, I have to come to the net very often and play hard with my forehands, with my backhands, and try to take all the chances.
Juan Martín del Potro. In the other quarterfinals, Roger Federer plays Kevin Anderson, Milos Raonic plays John Isner and Novak Djokovic plays Kei Nishikori. And the mainland Tactics will be looking for a third consecutive win in the National Netball Premiership against table toppers the Central Pulse in Christchurch tonight. That's the news.
Standing up for free speech.
So you are supporting his right to make racist views in New Zealand?
Yes. Standing their ground.
I don't really accept the not $1 more. We've actually put a significantly large additional amount of money into this deal.
And a standing ovation.
And it is over. Allez les Bleus! A French connection all the way to the World Cup final.
Morning Report. We don't take the news sitting down. Guy Nesper and Giles Beckford from 6 o'clock.
Then on 9 to noon, a high school chemistry student about to pit his skills against other teens at the 50th International Chemistry Olympiad. And after 10, the Californian cop and hostage negotiator turned adventure writer Robin Bursell. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow for Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine spells, scattered showers clearing in the west tomorrow from Waitomo northwards. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, however brief showers spreading north tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington also Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson mainly fine. A few showers about the Ranges and Tararua district spreading everywhere for a time tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago fine apart from showers this evening and overnight with snow to 300 metres in Otago and 600 metres in Canterbury. Buller, Westland and Fiordland outbreaks of rain with some heavy falls, hail and possible thunderstorms. Clearing tomorrow apart from a few showers in Buller. The Southland, a period of rain later today with squally thunderstorms and snow lowering to 300 metres, a few morning showers, then becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, for the first time in a generation, nurses are set to walk off the job. For 24 hours, 70% of the country's nurses will strike after last-ditch talks with the District Health Board negotiators at the request of the Employment Relations Authority, the ERA, ended fruitlessly mid-morning. The other 30% will work to ensure public safety, staffing, life-saving services, emergency services, obviously. So what happens now? After months of failed negotiations, the DHB say they're now simply waiting for direction from the ERA, which will make recommendations after those last-minute talks this morning. Here's DHB spokesperson Helen Mason at a media conference just over an hour ago.
We're very disappointed to be advised that NZNO is going ahead with a strike. We are awaiting the final recommendations from the ERA facilitator, and we're very disappointed that strike action is going ahead, given that we have yet to receive those final recommendations and neither party's had an opportunity to review the recommendations. DHBs look forward to receiving the final recommendations from the facilitator, and we will be taking those recommendations very seriously and considering them very seriously. And we'll be taking our time over that, but we're pleased that we've had the opportunity to work with the facilitator. The facilitator has considered the matters from both parties' perspectives, is very, very well versed in the issues, has absolutely heard nurses' concerns, as have DHBs. We've been working very hard over the last 24 hours to try and find resolution, and DHBs will continue to find and to work very hard to find a way forward with this. In the interim, as you're all aware, we have been very, very focused on planning for strike action. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate the messages to our public that DHBs have been working for months, for about 3 months, on ensuring that should industrial action go ahead, that DHBs are very, very well prepared. Those efforts have been led by our most senior clinicians. And so the public, I'm keen for the public to know that senior clinicians have been working on those plans for an extended period of time. People will be able to access information from their local DHBs, but what I would do is I would urge anybody who has an urgent medical need to not hesitate to attend an emergency department, to not hesitate to dial 111 and call an ambulance. The other thing is, for more usual day-to-day medical queries, can people please remember that they have the option of contacting their GPs, of contacting local pharmacists, and also using the 0800 Healthline number.
That's DHB spokesperson Helen Mason talking at a media conference, while delivering a statement at a media conference just over an hour ago. The Nurses Organisation spokesperson is C. Payne, and C joins us now live. Are you there, C?
Kia ora, John.
Kia ora, nice to talk to you. Right.
You too.
Now, the Nurses Organisation recommended acceptance of the last DHB offer. So I guess the question is, do you agree with the decision to strike tomorrow?
Yes, definitely. Look, the bargaining team under our bargaining policy does need to make that kind of call. They can either make no recommendation or they can make one for or against, and they felt that it was important in the context of facilitation that they did show some leadership and recommend it. However, we have always said that at the end of the day, the democratic decision of our members through the ballot determines where we stand, and we are right behind our members in that decision. It doesn't reflect on that at all. It's about trying to give some guidance when we make a recommendation as to the offer, and at the end of the day, when the members make the clear outcome known to us, we are absolutely standing beside them in that call. Right, so you are a democratic organisation, and the majority, I think by a really overwhelming number, voted to strike. Full stop, that's the end of it. But why did you make the recommendation to accept the DHB offer? What was it about the offer that you thought had made it satisfactory in the end? Well, we saw that there was an improved offer. So when we have an improved offer, we do feel some obligation to bring it to members to be tested. I mean, that's difficult. You've got 30,000 members. It's very hard to know what will be acceptable, what isn't. So the negotiation team saw there was an improvement and that we were able to meet the first priority that came through in the survey, which was about distributing some of the money across all the occupational groups to make it more equal. We didn't have a decision in the first offer that the DHB's put forward around putting the 2 steps on the RN scale and left everybody else at with the 3, 3 and 3. So it was a key thing that came through from the survey, so that's what the bargaining team endeavoured to do. And the other key change was that we did get agreement from the DHBs that pay equity would be implemented within the term of the agreement. So we saw it as an improved offer. The bargaining team said, let's make that recommendation to the members, and the members have been clear. It was a much closer vote, but you know, at the end of the day, it's the majority that decides, and we've been preparing for industrial action. We haven't taken our foot off the pedal while we're in those processes. We've been doing all of the hard work we need to do around life-preserving services to make sure our public and patients are safe. And, you know, everyone's ready for the actions. All the actions are in place. So there was no stepping away from preparing for industrial action by the union. We were not in any doubt about that. We knew we had to continue with both strategies until we got that vote from members.
Right. So if the second DHB offer was an improvement, and we heard Grant Robertson on Morning Report this morning saying there is effectively a fiscal cap. There is no more money available. Nurses have had the increased offer that they are going to have. What's going to change to resolve this? We're getting a lot of feedback on this, much of it in support of the nurses going on strike. But this from Karen, who contacted via Facebook, and she said, what happens after the nurses strike? As there is no more money on offer, do they just go back to work for their existing pay conditions, or are they planning more action? I'd like someone to explain what happens on Friday. And I guess the point Helen Mason was making is that perhaps the facilitator answers that question. But what do you think happens on Friday?
Well, we've concluded facilitation at this point in time, but we're on the basis that bargaining is still continuing, and that was important. And both parties are still committed to resolving this dispute. So whilst we haven't set dates around how we might reconnect, or whether that's through facilitation, mediation, or just together, at the end of the day, once we've had the industrial action, bargaining will continue. We will be making, moves to go back to the table and see if there is any ability to secure additional funding. We very much want to address the issues that have now been created for Step 7, our new Step 7 that was offered, but which has been moved quite way out in the agreement because of the needing to share the money around. So we've endeavoured to work within the funding constraint, but our members haven't been able to get a settlement or an offer that actually is acceptable to the majority of members doing that. We made it clear to the facilitator and coming into facilitation that we didn't believe that without additional funding that there was any ability through facilitation to address the current difficulties in our dispute.
And
we went in on that basis.
Yeah, and the baggage, the dispute has its difficulties, but the baggage is years in the making, isn't it? And we've been speaking to nurses for weeks now. They are exhausted. They feel underappreciated. They feel like they just simply haven't kept up with the cost of living, that they haven't even retained CPI adjustments effectively. They are, in short, a lot of them, and forgive me for using this phrase, but it's a great shorthand and New Zealanders will understand what I mean, really pissed off by what hasn't happened over the past 10 years. How do you resolve that?
Well, it's very difficult to turn it around, and certainly it's not the union's job to turn it around. I mean, it's up to the employers to actually address the whole situation that has arisen over the decade. Nurses have got a low trust. DHBs haven't maintained in the past their commitments around implementing safe staffing systems, which are, so critical. We know that they're stressed. We know they're fatigued. They go to work. There is constant requirement on nurses to work overtime, on call, unsocial hours, in addition to normal working hours, because there are not enough staff. In fact, when they came to us with some of the life-preserving services numbers, they were asking us to fill numbers of staff for the strike that they actually can't roster themselves because they don't have enough staff. And I mean, and we've made that clear to the Minister. We've talked about those things, and we've made every endeavour to do what we can to make sure our hospitals are safe tomorrow. We have got over 5,000 nurses working. We've got about, it's a considerable number. It's about 20% of our membership who are actually working to make sure hospitals are safe tomorrow.
C. Payne, who is the spokesperson for the Nurses Organisation, joining us live there. Obviously, there is a facilitator making recommendations, and therein perhaps a solution lies. But at the moment, as you can hear, there is a fiscal cap, no more money available, and clearly there is still a distance between the two parties. We will update you as we hear more, of course. It's 90 minutes past 6. Drones are being so heavily used in tourist hotspots like Queenstown and Tekapo that the Civil Aviation Authority is looking at tougher rules for recreational drone operators. The CAA says an independently commissioned survey shows there are now around 250,000 New Zealanders who either own a drone or have flown one, even more. And wait, there's more than that, because over and above that figure, 200,000 overseas tourists bring their drones on holiday with them here each year, a number that's growing. And they like to put them up where the view is best, creating a kind of low-level aviation traffic problem in some areas. Tracy Neal went to a seminar of commercial drone operators and aviation specialists in Nelson, and she filed this report.
Modern technology means drones can be easier to operate than a model aeroplane, and for $1,000 you've got your own aircraft. The trouble is, the technology has taken off faster than the rules can keep pace with, says Ken McMillan of Service IQ, an industry training organisation that sets aviation unit standards.
When the drone phenomenon took off, everyone raced in to try and organise everything, but the magnitude of drone flying has outgrown qualifications, if you like, so what we've had in the past is really, really outdated.
There are now 105 certified commercial drone operators and another 40 waiting to be certified, according to the Civil Aviation Authority. The biggest growth in commercial use has come from real estate agents. Although there are fewer rules governing recreational users, they still have to meet a range of conditions, such as not flying within 4 kilometres of an airport and having the consent of anyone they want to fly above. Jeremy Sharp from Airways New Zealand says air traffic controllers are seeing more drones, especially around Auckland.
It's not to say it's not happening elsewhere, but to actually see a drone is pretty difficult. So when a pilot reports a drone, it's the tip of the iceberg.
And that's proving to be a headache. Air New Zealand demanded tougher rules for drone operators after a drone came within an estimated 5 metres of one of its planes at Auckland Airport in March. Mr Sharp says Airways is already trialling drone detection systems.
What it is very accurate holographic radar system that can apparently tell the difference between a drone and a sparrow about 8 miles away.
The CAA says while it's trying to establish accurate figures on drone numbers in New Zealand, it's more worried about the number of tourists using them. The authority's senior technical specialist of unmanned aircraft, Mark Houston, says it's causing problems in pressure points like Queenstown, Milford Sound, and one of the country's most photographed chapels, the Church of the Good Shepherd.
I was in Tekapo recently, and they were having tremendous issues with drones being flown around the wee church on the lake shore there. There's people trying to fly in the doors and things like that. So,
Mr Houston says CAA is working with tour companies to highlight the rules around drone use. It's also considering using the rules that govern commercial drone operators as a template for recreational users. Jeremy Sharp from Airways agrees it's time.
As air traffic controllers, we can only apply the procedures and so on applicable to the rules, but we don't make the rules, so we have to wait for the regulator to create the regulatory framework that we can then develop our procedures and to keep it safe.
Mr Houston says the 1,542 bird strikes and 281 reported laser strikes on aircraft over the past 3 years remain a bigger risk to aviation than drones. He says the main risk remains one of flying over people. Mr Sharp says the risk to public safety is largely ignored in the debate.
You've got something that weighs, 3 or 4 kilograms doing 50 kilometres an hour can take somebody's head off, or take a car off the road. So, they are potentially very hazardous.
The Civil Aviation Authority is also looking to develop a better incident reporting culture among drone operators. It can issue infringements for rule breaches and can also bring criminal charges against the worst offenders. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Thanks, Tracy. There'll be some people in Christchurch wishing they could hover above the ground at the moment. We've mentioned it earlier in the program, but the situation's got worse since Johns Road is down to one lane northbound at Sawyers Arms Road intersection. Congestion is queued back to Memorial Ave, according to the good people at Canterbury Traffic. Delays are severe. Motorists should expect an additional 20 minutes on their travel time. Motorists are advised to use an alternative route. So that's one lane northbound, Sawyers Arms Road. That's the intersection of Sawyers Arms and Johns Road. Sorry, traffic is just a nightmare according to the good folk in Christchurch. Avoid it if you can, and if you are stuck in it, we send our sympathy, because it does look like a long old backup now. It's 24 minutes past 6. More money for insulating old homes is being welcomed by many, but some say it's not enough and may miss the mark. The government today officially launched the rollout of its $142 million scheme that provides a 2/3 subsidy for low-income homeowners on the cost of fitting insulation and in the ceiling and under the floor. Speaking of Christchurch, one of our excellent Christchurch reporters, Conan Young, reports.
On hand at today's launch in Christchurch were a couple in their 80s, Watty and Bev Meadowcroft, who were amongst those about to benefit from the more generous subsidy.
You're going to put insulation under the floor.
And do you notice it at the moment without it?
Oh, yes, we certainly do. You can sit there and you feel the draft coming up through the carpet.
Lynn Hills has just recently had her ceiling insulated thanks to the scheme and says she's already noticing the difference.
I had insul fluff on the roof, which has been there probably 15 years, and I haven't got any double glazing. So the house was a wee bit chilly, so I live in the main area and use one bedroom, one bathroom. Now I've got insulation. It's amazing.
Pam Wooten-Peters opened her home up to the Energy Minister, Megan Woods, and a scrum of media today to show everybody the newly installed insulation at her house. She says it's like living in a different home.
When I bought the house, I thought I'd be sweet as, but I wasn't. And yeah, I was wearing 4 layers of clothes and I was still very cold.
The money is available to any homeowner who has a community services card, has health problems, or is living in a low decile area. Megan Woods says it will go a long way to helping retirees struggling to keep their power bills under control, while at the same time ensuring their homes are warm.
We know there's high rates of home ownership amongst people on the pension. They've started getting their winter energy payment, so there's a real opportunity to maximise how far that winter energy payment is going to go in subsequent years for people if we can insulate their homes as well.
But beneficiary advocate Alistair Russell says many poor people will end up missing out because most do not own their own homes.
That's great for the few people who are in that situation of low income and home ownership. But in terms of the social issues, a subsidy-based approach doesn't work. There needs to be consideration into how you compel landlords to make their living up to a standard that is acceptable.
Alistair Russell says requiring those on low incomes to pony up to 1/3 of the cost of the insulation may be a stretch.
They would probably be incurring debt to make that happen. People would be borrowing money from work and income, for example, and incurring further debts with them. You know, people on low incomes do not have large amounts of money saved in the bank. Their money goes on day-to-day and week-to-week expenses.
The New Zealand Green Building Council Chief Executive, Andrew Eagles, welcomes the money, but says it's too little and not being made available soon enough. He notes there are around 800,000 homes in New Zealand that don't have sufficient insulation, and that the latest scheme will only fix 6% of these houses over the next 4 years. He says stricter rules around the health of a home would be more effective than increased subsidies.
In 28 countries of Europe, they all have something called an energy performance certificate, and that would mean that when you go to buy a home or when you go to rent it, you will be able to check these things before you go in, and that's mandatory. And that would give a really good, clear indication, and it would mean that people selling would be embarrassed if the home wasn't a decent quality.
Andrew Eagles says better homes means better health.
We have tens of thousands of children that are sick each year. We have 1,600 excess winter deaths. you'll have more productive workforce, you'll have lower costs for DHBs. So when they insulated homes, they saw a 50% drop-off in frequent flyers in Christchurch and Gisborne DHBs.
The government is now consulting with the landlords about new rules for rentals that would require them to be properly insulated and have a heating source within the next 6 years. For Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tene.
Gosh, a lot of feedback coming in. This from a doctor. The DHB's offered a less than 2% increase of nurses on the floor, 500 extra nurses, a staff of 30,000. For safe staffing in public hospitals, there needs to be a 20, 30, perhaps 40% increase in nursing numbers. I fully support my colleagues in their actions whilst trying to improve patient safety in the public health system. That is a doctor in the public health system. This person says, John, I have in effect been a Step 7 for the past 21 years, and if the DHBs had just agreed to start paying me as such immediately, instead of telling me I would have to wait another 2 years, then I would have accepted the offer. I also wanted the DHBs to commit to employing all the new graduate RNs that New Zealand trains. That to me would show good faith in committing to improved and safer staffing. If these two things changed, then I wouldn't be striking tomorrow. That's from a full-time DHB registered nurse for 27 years of unbroken service. Getting a lot of feedback and support of the nurses. And we really appreciate hearing from you all. Text 2101, although I wouldn't do so tonight because we're finishing in 20 seconds, but we do love hearing from you on behalf of the excellent and hard-working Checkpoint team. Thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate the privilege of your company, and we hope you'll join us again tomorrow from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Disappointment and annoyed DHB chiefs are continuing to try and reach an agreement with nurses, but tomorrow's strike is going ahead. The number of complaints of verbal and physical abuse against children in early childhood education centres are on the rise. Tauranga's Deputy Mayor says it will pass on to the police any information the council receives about claims Te Awanuiarangi Black was a pedophile. The latest housing affordability study by Massey University shows house prices are now 9 times annual wages. And with air traffic controllers reporting more drones near airports, Airways New Zealand is trialling new detectors. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, Melody Thomas here from Bang, the podcast exploring sex, relationships and intimacy. In episode 7, casting off shame and embarrassment.
I was like, oh, no, haven't done that.